Ava Clark had known hard days before, but nothing prepared her for the violent storm swallowing Austin the night everything in her life came undone. Wind whipped down the narrow streets as if the sky itself had turned against her, and the rain came in sheets so heavy she could barely see the road ahead. She stood outside her aging apartment complex, clenching the straps of her fraying canvas bag while the landlord shouted over the thunder that the rent was going up 40% starting next month, and tenants who could not keep up needed to leave immediately. Ava tried to reason with him, but he shut the door before she could finish her sentence, leaving her standing in the rain with her old suitcase and the single most precious thing she owned, a small canvas tote filled with the last remaining keepsakes of Emily Grace, the little girl she had cared for as a part-time nanny for 2 years before the family moved out of state and took the child with them. The wind slammed against her back as she stepped onto the sidewalk. Her umbrella snapped in an instant, and she tossed it into a nearby bin. She hugged the canvas tote tight, feeling the soft edges of the items inside the drawing Emily had given her on her last day together. The small plastic hospital bracelet from when Emily had been sick and refused to be treated unless Ava stayed in the room with her, and the photo Ava had begged the mother to let her keep a simple picture taken at Zilker Park with Emily's arms thrown around her neck. The rain made the bag slippery, but Ava held on until a car sped past the curb faster than any responsible driver would dare on a night like this. A sheet of dirty water surged up from the pavement and crashed into her legs, soaking everything. The canvas tote flew from her arms and dropped in the middle of a puddle. Ava chased it with a gasp, slipping on the wet pavement as she knelt and pulled it from the water. She unzipped it with trembling fingers. The drawing was smeared. The plastic bracelet was filled with water bubbles. The photo was bleeding ink. Something inside Ava cracked wide open, and she pressed the soaked items against her chest. Rain mixed with tears until she could not tell which was which. Her shoulders shook as she crouched on the sidewalk, blue lights from nearby buildings shimmering against the flooded pavement. She had no home, no savings, no family. And now, even the last pieces of Emily seemed ruined. She whispered a soft apology to a child who was not even there, the words lost in the thunder. Then a quiet hum approached, different from the roar of the storm. A sleek electric vehicle came to a stop beside her, its headlights washing her in pale light. She instinctively stepped back, clutching her ruined tote as the passenger window lowered with a smooth mechanical sound. Inside sat a man with dark hair slightly tousled, as if he had been running his hands through it for hours. The glow from the car's dashboard softened the sharp lines of his face. His eyes locked onto her with an expression she did not expect from a stranger, a blend of recognition and something close to concern. Ava knew that face. She had seen it once, months ago, when a man had forgotten his wallet on the counter of the cafe where she worked. She remembered chasing him outside to return it only to discover he had tipped her with an amount she refused on principle. She had pushed the bills back into his hand and smiled, insisting that good service did not need extravagant thank yous. The man had looked shocked, as if no one had spoken to him that plainly in years. Now he was here on a dark, storm-soaked street, looking at her exactly as he had then, surprised and oddly attentive. "Julian Mercer," she whispered, barely audible even to herself. CEO of Mercer Labs, one of the largest and most disruptive tech companies in the country, a man she had only known through headlines and the brief moment he had passed her a grateful smile in her cafe. Julian studied her soaked clothes and shaking hands. Then his gaze fell on the ruined drawing sticking out from the tote. A subtle but unmistakable shift crossed his face, something breaking through the composed exterior he normally showed the world. He leaned closer. "Ava," he said her name, sounding strangely gentle beneath the roar of rain. She lifted her head, blinking through tears, unable to form words. He looked at the destroyed keepsakes in her arms, and something in him moved the way a locked door shifts under the right pressure. "Do you need a safe place tonight?" he asked carefully, as if speaking too loudly might shatter her completely. The kindness in his voice nearly melted her exhaustion. She hesitated, fear and pride wrestling inside her chest while thunder cracked overhead. The water kept running down her arms, and every part of her ached from cold and humiliation. She opened her mouth, but only a faint sound escaped. Julian unlocked the passenger door with a soft click. Ava stared at it, unsure whether stepping inside was surrender or survival. But as another burst of wind cut through her soaked clothing, she realized she had nowhere else to go. She clutched the ruined tote against her heart, took a shaky breath, and stepped toward the open door. Unsure whether this night was the end of her life as she knew it, or the beginning of something she could not yet understand. Ava stepped into the warmth of the car, hesitating as the door closed behind her, with a quiet final click sealing out the storm that had soaked through her bones. The interior smelled faintly of leather and cedar, and the soft glow from the dashboard lights made everything feel strangely unreal after the darkness outside. She sat stiffly in the passenger seat, gripping the wet tote in her lap while Julian pulled away from the curb with a controlled calm that contrasted sharply with the chaos swirling inside her chest. Neither of them spoke at first. The rhythmic whisper of the wipers and the distant rumble of thunder filled the silence. Ava kept her eyes on the drops racing down the window until Julian spoke in a voice low but steady. "You are freezing. There are blankets in the back if you need one." She swallowed hard but nodded, reaching behind her seat for a soft gray throw. The warmth was immediate and almost too much after the cold she had endured, but she wrapped it around her shoulders anyway, letting the tension in her muscles loosen just a little. Julian kept his gaze on the road, but she could sense his attention flicking to her every few seconds. When he finally spoke again, his tone was careful as though he did not want to startle her. "I remember you. From the cafe. You returned my wallet before I even realized I had lost it." Ava blinked, surprised he remembered. Most customers, especially the wealthy ones, drifted in and out without noticing the staff, but he had clearly held on to that moment. She nodded, her fingers tightening around the tote. "You tried to give me money," she said softly, "and I did not want it." He let out a quiet breath that could have been a laugh but lacked amusement. "That was the first time in years someone refused me anything." He paused, as if the admission embarrassed him. It made more of an impression than you might think. The rain softened outside as they turned into the private driveway of a high-rise building whose glass windows shimmered against the stormy sky. Ava stared in disbelief. "Is this where you live?" she whispered. He gave another small nod. "Temporarily," he said. "I do not spend much time here, but it is safe and dry, and you need both tonight." Something in the way he said safe made her chest tighten. He parked beneath the covered entrance, then stepped out into the rain without hesitation, circling the car to open her door. She tried to take her suitcase, but he shook his head, lifting it effortlessly while she clutched the soaked tote to her chest. The lobby inside was polished marble and soft lighting and tall plants that felt too elegant for someone who had just been crying in the street. Ava stood still, unsure whether she belonged in this world. Julian handed his keys to the concierge, then motioned her toward the elevator. The ride up was quiet except for the faint mechanical hum and the pounding in her chest. When the doors opened, she stepped into the penthouse and her breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the storm sweeping across the city. Everything was sleek, modern, and expensive, yet somehow cold, like a museum where no one truly lived. Ava instinctively shrank closer to the entrance, afraid of dripping water on the pristine floor. Julian noticed. "You do not have to stand there," he said gently. "Come inside. I will get you something warm to wear." While he walked toward a hallway, Ava slowly stepped forward, scanning the space. There were no photographs, no personal decorations, no signs of a life lived here. It felt hollow, beautiful, but hollow. When Julian returned, he handed her a soft cotton sweater and joggers. "The guest room is down the hall," he said. "You can shower, change, rest. There is no expectation for anything else. I want to be clear about that." His straightforward reassurance eased her fear, though confusion still lingered. "Why are you helping me?" she asked quietly. "People like you do not usually stop for people like me." He looked at her for a long moment. "People like me," he repeated with a strange expression. Then he shook his head. "I am helping you because you looked like you had nowhere else to go, and because you are the only person in months who has spoken to me without calculating what you could get from it." Ava did not quite know how to respond to that, so she simply held the clothes to her chest and whispered a small thank you before retreating to the guest room. The hot water of the shower washed away the cold, but not the exhaustion. She changed and returned to the living room where Julian sat at the dining table staring at documents spread across it. Papers highlighted and annotated covered nearly every inch of the table alongside a half-eaten protein bar and an untouched cup of tea, now cold. He looked up as she approached. "Do you feel any better?" he asked. "A little." She hesitated. "Thank you again. You did not have to do this." He gathered the papers into a stack and pushed them aside. "Actually, there is something I was hoping to talk to you about." The way he said it made Ava tense. She wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. "Talk about what?" she asked cautiously. Julian rested his hands on the table fingers, interlocking as though preparing himself for a conversation he was not entirely comfortable with. "Something happened today with the board," he began. "They suspended my authority at Mercer Labs until I meet a specific condition outlined in my father's trust. I do not agree with the condition, but I am bound to it." Ava frowned. "What condition?" Julian took a slow breath and met her eyes with a level of vulnerability she did not expect from someone like him. "I need to be married before my 35th birthday." It was so unexpected, Ava simply stared at him, unsure whether she had heard correctly. "Married," she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded once. "And not just ceremonially. It must be legal, recognized, stable. The board wants the appearance of continuity and responsibility. They want reassurance the company will stay in the family line." Ava felt a strange twist in her stomach. "I do not understand why you are telling me this," she said carefully. Julian held her gaze steady and unflinching. "Because Ava," he said in a quiet voice that rippled through her like another shock of thunder, "I would like to offer you something. A marriage contract." Ava froze in place the moment the words left Julian's mouth, as if the entire room had tilted at an impossible angle. A marriage contract. The phrase sounded unreal, spoken so calmly in a penthouse that felt too large for the two of them and too empty for the weight of what he was suggesting. She stared at him, unable to form a coherent response. Her fingers tightened around the blanket draped across her shoulders, as though it could shield her from the shock reverberating inside her. Julian did not flinch under her silence. He simply waited, giving her space to react, even though his expression revealed a hint of tension at the edge of his features. When she finally found her voice, it came out small, uncertain. "Is this some kind of joke?" He shook his head slowly. "No. I would never joke about something like this." She swallowed hard, trying to make sense of the situation. "You do not know me. I mean, not really. Why would you ask me that?" Julian leaned back slightly as if to show he was not trying to corner her. "Because you are honest, Ava, and because you are not connected to my world. That matters more than you think." She blinked, baffled. "You need someone who does not know anything about you. That does not make sense." He rubbed his jaw for a moment, choosing his words with care. "I need someone who has no allegiance to the board, no interest in company politics, and no reason to manipulate the situation. Someone who sees me as a person, not a position. You are the only one in months who has looked at me that way." The honesty in his tone unsettled her more than the proposal itself. Ava shook her head, still overwhelmed. "This is impossible. I am not the kind of person who belongs in a millionaire contract or any contract like that." Julian regarded her quietly, then stood and walked to a small drawer near the kitchen. He returned, holding a slim folder. He placed it gently on the table. "You do not need to answer now," he said, "but at least read it. That is all I ask." Her heart pounded in her ears as she slowly sat down across from him. The folder looked too elegant for something as life-changing as a marriage contract, yet there it lay between them. She took a breath, then opened it. The first page held her name typed neatly beside his. The legal tone of the document struck her instantly. Every line was written with precision, outlining terms, responsibilities, and duration. She skimmed the key points, feeling a strange mix of disbelief and confusion swirl within her. 12 months. A fixed legal union renewable only by mutual consent. Housing included. A stable salary. Assistance with outstanding debts. Medical coverage. A confidentiality clause. And then, at the bottom of the page, a handwritten note from Julian. No intimacy required. No physical expectations. No emotional demands. Honesty above all. Ava looked up, meeting his eyes. You wrote this. He nodded without hesitation. I needed that part to be perfectly clear. She looked back at the paper, scanning every line again, as if any moment the words might rearrange themselves into something less surreal. You really do not want anything from me, she murmured. Not like that. Julian shook his head. I will never ask you for anything you do not freely give. Ava felt her chest tighten at the sincerity in his voice. But then she reached the section that made her breath hitch. Family expectations and future heirs. She stared at the words, her stomach twisting painfully. Her vision dimmed at the edges as the memories of Emily Grace surfaced, the way the little girl's small hand had wrapped around hers during bedtime stories, the soft laughter the mornings they spent at the park the day she had to say goodbye, and the ache that had not left her since. Something in Ava recoiled. The word heirs felt cruel in a way Julian could not possibly understand. She looked down so he would not see the sudden tears burning at the corners of her eyes. Julian watched her carefully, sensing the shift in her breathing, but not the reason behind it. That clause, he began, hesitating, as if he too found it uncomfortable, was part of the trust my father wrote years ago. It is why the board feels justified in pushing me to follow it, and why the marriage cannot be symbolic. Ava forced a nod, but her thoughts were spinning. Why would anyone put something like that in writing? She asked softly. Julian exhaled a weary breath. Because my father believed that family legacy should be tied to bloodline continuity. He believed that my future stability depended on it. I do not share his beliefs. Ava kept her gaze fixed on the text, unwilling to let him see how deeply the clause cut her. She wanted to ask so many things, but the fear of sounding foolish held her back. So you need someone to help you keep your position at the company, she said instead. Yes. But not at the cost of someone else's dignity, Julian replied. This is a partnership, not an arrangement of power. You would have full autonomy. No one would control you. She believed him. She did not know why, but she did. Still, the weight of the offer pressed against her like a tide she could not stop. Why me? She whispered. Why not someone from your world? Someone who knows how to handle this. His gaze softened in a way she had not seen before. Because someone from my world would see this as leverage, he said quietly. You are the only person who made no attempt to use me. That matters more than you can imagine. Ava looked again at the contract. Every practical detail was there. A place to live, stability, resources she had never had, a chance to rebuild a life that had collapsed around her. But the word heirs hovered over everything like a shadow. Her hand trembled slightly. I cannot promise anything about that part, she said barely above a whisper. Julian shook his head firmly. And I am not asking you to. Ava closed the folder, letting her fingers rest on its smooth cover. She had no home, no safety, no future she could see. Every path in her life had narrowed into impossibly tight corners except the one he was offering. It frightened her. It also felt like the only way forward. When she finally lifted her eyes, she spoke with a fragile steadiness she barely recognized. If I sign this, my life changes completely. Julian nodded. Yes, but you will not go through it alone. Her breath faltered. She reached for the pen beside the folder. Slowly, deliberately, she wrote her name. The ink glided smoothly, marking the beginning of a reality she had never imagined for herself. When she finished, she set the pen down, her hand trembling. Julian watched her with quiet respect, not triumph. Ava stood feeling both weightless and anchored by a choice that would alter everything. She had stepped into a world she never thought she would enter, and there was no turning back now. Ava had imagined New York many times before, but nothing resembled the overwhelming reality that greeted her the moment she stepped out of the town car with Julian beside her. The towering skyline felt like a wall of glass and steel swallowing the clouds above, and the crisp morning air carried the bustling rhythm of a city that never paused long enough to breathe. She clutched her small suitcase and the restored canvas tote, while Julian guided her through the private entrance of the skyscraper that housed his penthouse. As the elevator ascended quietly, Ava watched the numbers climb higher and higher until the doors opened onto a space that took her breath away. The penthouse stretched wide with walls of glass revealing Manhattan from a height she had never imagined standing in. Buildings glimmered under the sunlight and traffic moved far below like streams of tiny lights. Yet, despite the grandeur, there was a kind of quiet emptiness in the air, a stillness that made the place feel more like a museum than a home. Ava set her suitcase near the entrance, uncertain where she was allowed to walk. Julian took a few steps inside, then paused, noticing her hesitation. "You can move freely," he said gently. "This is your home too now." The words felt too large for Ava to accept immediately, so she simply nodded and followed him inside. Her eyes landed on minimalist furniture arranged with precision, clean lines, muted colors, and surfaces free of clutter. It was clear Julian lived with efficiency, not warmth. He led her to the guest room, where she would stay until the wedding paperwork was finalized. The room was bright and comfortable but still held the same untouched feel as the rest of the penthouse. Ava placed her things on the neatly made bed and walked slowly to the window, staring down at the city she would now have to learn to navigate. Once she returned to the living area, a woman was already standing near the kitchen counter flipping through a digital tablet. She was tall, with sleek dark hair, tied back perfectly, a tailored navy dress, and eyes sharp enough to slice through glass. When she noticed Ava, her polite smile did not quite reach her eyes. "You must be Ava," she said, extending a hand. "I am Cora Shaw, Mr. Mercer's executive assistant." Julian stepped beside Ava, sensing the discomfort in her stiff posture. "Cora handles most of my scheduling and communications," he explained. "She will help with your onboarding into the public role." Ava gave a small handshake, unsure how much pressure to use. "Nice to meet you," she murmured. Cora's gaze swept over Ava, subtly assessing. Her expression remained pleasant, but Ava felt the silent judgment beneath it, the unspoken question of why someone like her was standing in someone like Julian's home. Julian cleared his throat, as if to redirect the moment. "I thought we could tour Mercer Labs today," he said, turning to Ava. "It will help you understand more about the company and the projects we support." Ava nodded, though her stomach fluttered nervously. She had never stepped foot in a corporate building, much less one owned by a billionaire. After she changed into simple but presentable clothes, they left the penthouse and arrived at Mercer Labs, a sleek tower of glass and innovation. The lobby alone felt like stepping into another world. Screens displayed rotating models of robotic limbs and holograms of data spiraling upward like digital waterfalls. Employees moved with smooth purpose, wearing badges and carrying tablets, their conversations a mix of technical terms Ava did not fully understand. Julian guided her through each section, explaining patiently without condescension. "This is our robotics division," he said, as they passed a transparent lab where engineers worked on delicate mechanical hands. "They are designing models for assisted mobility." Ava watched in awe as small motors flexed and relaxed synthetic fingers. Further inside, he showed her the AI therapy department where specialists developed programs for children with developmental challenges. One room held colorful cushions and screens displaying comforting animation. "The project is called Mercerkind," he said. "We are working to make therapy more accessible for families who cannot afford private support." Ava felt her chest warm at the sincerity in his tone. The idea of helping children brought memories of Emily Grace into focus, but instead of pain, there was a moment of hope. She turned to Julian. "This is amazing," she whispered. "I never knew technology could be used like this." Julian gave a faint smile, the kind he rarely showed in pictures. "Technology should make people's lives better," he replied quietly. "Not just make companies richer." As they continued the tour, some employees recognized Julian and whispered among themselves when they noticed Ava walking beside him. She felt their stares prick her skin, the curiosity and skepticism mixed together. By the time they returned to the penthouse, Ava was exhausted from absorbing so much new information, but also oddly inspired. She spent the evening sitting at the kitchen island sipping tea while Julian reviewed documents. She watched the way his shoulders tensed, the way he rubbed his temple, the quiet sigh that escaped when he thought she was not looking. There was a deep loneliness in him, one she had glimpsed in the empty hallways and unlit corners of the penthouse. After a while, he closed his laptop and looked up. "How are you adjusting so far?" he asked. Ava hesitated, choosing honesty over politeness. "It is overwhelming, but not in a bad way." just different. He nodded, like he expected that answer. "There is no rush," he said. "Take your time. This world is not something most people step into easily." Before she could respond, the elevator chimed softly and Cora stepped out holding a folder. "The scheduling documents you requested, Mr. Mercer," she said, before turning to Ava with that same polite smile. "We will need to prepare you for public events soon. Image training, wardrobe assessments, media strategy." Ava's cheeks warmed. "I have never been in public events like that." Cora's brows lifted slightly. "Well, there is a first time for everything." Julian shot Cora a subtle warning glance. "We will handle things at a pace she is comfortable with," he said firmly. Cora bowed her head respectfully, though the tension in her posture betrayed her irritation. Ava watched the exchange feeling both grateful and unsettled. The weight of entering Julian's world pressed around her again, the expectations, the scrutiny, the invisible rules she did not yet understand. Later that night, as she stood near the window watching the city lights flicker below, she whispered a quiet thought to herself. "Two lives under one roof," she murmured. "How are we going to make this work?" She did not expect an answer, but deep down she felt something shift as Julian appeared in the reflection behind her, the soft glow of the room casting warm light around him. Somehow, despite everything, it no longer felt like two separate lives. It felt like the fragile beginning of something neither of them fully understood yet. Ava never imagined she would attend a high-profile launch event in Manhattan, but that evening she stood in front of the full-length mirror wearing a simple ivory dress chosen by the stylist Julian had insisted on hiring. The dress was elegant, yet modest, and although she had never worn anything so refined, it did not feel like a costume. It felt like a promise that she might someday belong somewhere beyond the shadow of her old life. When she stepped out of the guest room, Julian paused mid-sentence while adjusting his cufflinks. His gaze softened, the faint tension around his eyes easing just a little. "You look perfect," he said quietly. Ava almost corrected him, insisting that perfect was impossible, but the sincerity in his voice left her speechless. The car ride to the gala was smooth, but Ava's heart thudded with every passing streetlight. She clutched the small clutch bag in her lap, rehearsing polite greetings in her head, though she doubted she could remember any once they arrived. Julian noticed her nervous fingers. "You do not have to impress anyone," he murmured. "Just stay close to me." She nodded, grateful for the reassurance, even if the knot in her stomach remained. The venue was a modern glass atrium filled with guests in formal attire, camera flashes, and the distant hum of conversations blending into a buzzing atmosphere. A large banner reading Mercer Kind Launch hung above the entrance. Ava stepped out of the car into a whirlwind of lights and voices. Reporters and photographers clustered on either side of the walkway like waves closing in. She tensed immediately, instinctively stepping closer to Julian. Flashbulbs exploded as soon as he placed a guiding hand behind her. Questions flew rapidly aimed at Julian, then at her. "Who is she? Is she your fiancé? Is she pregnant?" Ava flinched at the last question, stumbling slightly before Julian steadied her. His jaw tightened, but he kept moving, guiding her through the noise. The murmurs grew louder, the words cutting through whispered. "Gold digger. Of course she is with him for the money. Look at her dress. She is not from his world." How convenient that the contract news leaked right before the event. Ava's face burned. She felt exposed, as though the entire city was dissecting her life without knowing anything about her. She tried to focus on the glowing entrances ahead, but every whisper seemed louder than the last. Julian angled his body closer to hers in a protective gesture, but the noise grew anyway. Someone shouted, "Are you the future mother of the Mercer heirs?" Ava froze, the word heirs slicing straight through her chest, reopening wounds she was not ready to confront in public. Before she could take another step, a reporter pushed forward, shoving a microphone nearly into her shoulder. "Mr. Mercer, is it true you selected her because of the clause requiring children? Did you choose her for that reason alone?" The crowd gasped, leaning in for his answer. Ava felt her breath lock in place, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the thunderous camera clicks. She stared at the floor, wishing she could disappear. All the memories of Emily Grace losing her unexpectedly, the ache that still lived beneath her ribs, surged painfully. She blinked rapidly, trying to keep her tears from spilling. Julian's voice came low, steady, and colder than she had ever heard. "That question is inappropriate." He removed the microphone gently but firmly, pushing it aside. "Ava is here because she belongs here beside me. Nothing more, nothing less." The firmness in his voice made several reporters step back, though not all. The whispers continued, but softer now. Julian touched her hand, lightly squeezing once. The small gesture meant more than he could have known, anchoring her amidst the storm of scrutiny. He leaned closer, speaking only for her. "Are you all right?" His voice sounded rough, strained with anger he had not shown openly. Ava nodded, though her lungs were tight. She followed him inside the atrium, where warm lights and soft music offered brief shelter from the chaos. Yet the moment they crossed the threshold, people continued to stare. Some masked their curiosity behind polite smiles. Others did not bother. A few whispered as she passed, their eyes sharp with judgment. Ava swallowed, fighting the urge to retreat to a corner. She forced herself to breathe slowly, counting to 3 the way she used to when Emily Grace had panic spells. Eventually, her thoughts quieted enough for her to take in the beauty of the event. Interactive displays demonstrating Mercer-Kind technology filled the hall. Screens showed children smiling as they used therapy tools and families expressing gratitude for accessibility. The sight softened Ava's chest and reminded her why the project mattered. When Julian was called to give a brief introduction, Ava stood aside near a glass pillar, watching as he spoke about the mission of Mercer-Kind with a passion she had not seen before. His voice was calm, steady, yet carried deep conviction. He believed in this project genuinely. That alone made her chest warm. As he finished speaking, a small group approached her, led by a tall woman with diamond earrings and a perfectly composed smile. "So, you are Ava," she said. The woman's tone dripped with interest rather than kindness. Ava nodded hesitantly. "We were wondering how long you and Julian have known each other. You look very new." Another whispered something that made the group chuckle. Ava tried to respond, but her throat tightened again. The humiliation sat heavy in her chest. Before she could attempt an answer, Julian stepped beside her, placing a hand on her lower back, a calm but unmistakable sign of support. "Excuse us," he said with polite finality, guiding Ava away from the group. Once they were out of earshot, he lowered his voice. "I am sorry Avery had to deal with that." People can be cruel when they want a story to fit their narrative. She looked up at him, surprised by the quiet anger in his eyes. "Julian, this is your world. I am not sure I belong in it." He paused, turning slightly toward her. "You belong wherever you choose to be, and you are not alone in this." His words were simple, but something in the way he said them resonated deeper than she expected. When the night ended, the car door closed, shutting out the last remaining echoes of whispered judgments. Ava let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. She looked down at their hands, resting close but not touching. The world had called her a gold digger. Yet in that moment, sitting beside Julian in the car, she realized something unexpected. He had not let go of her once. Not when the lights flashed, not when the questions stabbed, not when she wavered. And for the first time since she entered his life, Ava felt a fragile but undeniable shift. Maybe this was not just survival. Maybe somewhere within this arrangement something real was beginning to form. Ava had been quiet the entire ride home from the Mercer-Kind event, her fingers tangled together in her lap as the city lights flickered across the car windows. Something inside her felt bruised, not from the cruel words flung at her by strangers, but from the single question that kept echoing in her mind, the one shouted by the reporter in front of everyone. Was she chosen because of the clause about children? She forced herself to breathe steadily, but her chest still tightened with every passing second. When the car finally stopped beneath the penthouse entrance, Julian stepped out first, offering her a hand, but she barely managed a nod as she followed him to the private elevator. They rode up in silence, the low hum of the machinery only amplifying the storm brewing inside her. Once they stepped into the penthouse, Ava walked to the window, gripping the railing as if the faint vibration of the city below could steady her thoughts. Julian watched her from a short distance, trying to give her space, yet unable to hide the tension in his shoulders. The events of the night still lingered in his eyes, a mix of anger at the press frustration at the spectacle and something deeper, almost protective. Ava's voice finally broke the silence, quiet but trembling. "Is that what they all think?" she asked. "That I am here because of that clause?" Julian exhaled slowly. "People will always craft the story that benefits them. It does not make it true." She nodded, but her throat tightened again. She turned around, her eyes glistening, though she tried to blink away the emotion before it showed. "I need to ask you something," she whispered, "and I need you to answer honestly." Julian stepped forward immediately, his posture alert. "Of course." Ava took a breath, steadying herself. "Do we need to have children for this contract to work?" The words left her in a bare whisper. Yet they struck the room with a force neither of them expected. Julian froze completely, his expression shifting from confusion to something deeper, a shadow of old pain flickering behind his eyes. Ava waited every second, stretching painfully as the question hovered between them. Julian looked away, his jaw tightening not in anger, but in a painful hesitation. Ava's heart sank. She thought maybe the question had offended him or touched something she was not supposed to touch. "I should not have asked," she murmured, turning toward the window again. "I am sorry. You deserve honesty," he said finally, his voice low, almost hoarse. "It is not you that the question hurts. It is me." She slowly turned back toward him. Julian ran a hand through his hair, stepping closer until the distance between them felt fragile thin, almost unnecessary. "There is something I have not told you," he said, "and you deserve to know before anything else moves forward." Ava's pulse quickened. Julian took another breath, one that sounded like he was forcing air past years of silence. "After the accident," he began, and Ava could hear how carefully he shaped each word as if he were reopening a part of himself he had kept locked away for too long. "I was told I would never be able to have children." The room fell still, silent, heavy. Ava's eyes widened. She felt her breath catch in her throat. Julian kept speaking softly, without theatrics, only truth. "My father used the condition in the trust as leverage. He believed heirs ensured legacy, but he never cared whether I wanted that life or whether I was capable of it. The board does not know. Most people do not know. Only a few doctors and Marcus." Ava's fingers curled around the fabric of her dress. "So the clause in the contract," she whispered, "was never my choice," Julian finished for her, "and it never should have been written the way it was." Ava stepped toward him slowly, feeling the weight of his confession settle around them. The pain in his voice was not loud, but it was deep enough to make her chest ache on his behalf. "You have been carrying this alone," she said softly. He gave the smallest nod. "I did not want pity or judgment, and I did not want my worth measured by something I cannot change." Ava understood far more than he realized. She knew what it felt like to lose something precious, something you loved, something you could not keep, no matter how fiercely you tried. She remembered holding Emily Grace's tiny hand, remembered promising she would always stay, only to learn she had no legal right, no power, no choice. The ache resurfaced, but this time it connected her to Julian, not in pain, but in recognition. "I would never force motherhood on you," Julian said suddenly, his voice firm, almost urgent as he met her gaze. "Never. Not for this contract, not for anyone's expectations, not even for the company. You deserve freedom, not obligation." Ava took another step, closing the distance between them until she could see the faint cracks in his composure. She realized then that Julian was not the emotionless executive the world saw. He was a man shaped by pressure, by loss, by expectations that had never fit him. And in that moment, something shifted gently between them like the soft turning of a new page. "I asked because I was afraid," she whispered. "Afraid that the only reason you chose me was because of something I cannot give either." His brows lifted slightly. Ava shook her head, trying to steady her voice. "Emily." "Grace," she said softly. "I lost her too. Not in the same way, but losing her still felt like losing a part of myself." The two of them stood quietly, the truth of their separate losses weaving a fragile connection they had not expected but could no longer deny. Julian's voice softened until it felt almost like a promise. You do not owe me more pain to make this work. We are in this together not because of what we can or cannot give, but because we chose to stand here now." Ava felt her eyes warm again, but this time the emotion was not fear. It was relief, understanding, something close to hope. She nodded, letting the weight of the night settle, but not crush her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for telling me, for trusting me." Julian's expression shifted subtly, the tension easing from his eyes. He stepped back just slightly, giving her space, but not distance. "We will move forward together," he said gently at her pace, "and on terms we both respect." Ava finally breathed fully, as if for the first time all night. The city lights flickered beyond the window, casting soft reflections around them. For a moment, the penthouse that once felt cold no longer seemed quite so empty. Something had changed quietly but profoundly. Ava and Julian had crossed an unseen threshold, and whatever came next they would face it not as strangers bound by a contract, but as two people who finally understood each other a little more deeply than before. In the days that followed their difficult conversation, something unspoken shifted between Ava and Julian, not in sudden dramatic ways, but in the quiet moments that slipped gently into their routines. The contract still existed, but it no longer felt like the thing defining every step they took together. Instead, it felt like the distant backdrop to something softer, something neither of them had planned, but both of them had begun to recognize. The first shift came late one evening when Julian returned to the penthouse long after sunset, the fatigue in his shoulders visible even from across the room. He set his laptop bag down with more care than usual and walked into the kitchen where Ava was attempting to follow an online recipe for soup, though most of the ingredients she needed were unfamiliar to her. Steam fogged the edges of her glasses and she stirred the pot with concentrated determination. When Julian entered, she jumped, slightly startled by his silent arrival. "Sorry," he said gently. "I did not mean to scare you." "You did not," she insisted, though her cheeks warmed in embarrassment. Julian moved closer, peering into the pot. "Soup. It looks good." Ava laughed softly. "You say that like you cannot actually see what is happening in this pot." He tilted his head, studying the uneven texture. "I am choosing optimism." She shook her head, amused. "Sit down, and I will try not to ruin dinner." He hesitated, then actually sat down at the kitchen island, something she had never seen him do when she cooked. She tried her best, following the recipe, while Julian watched her with an expression that held less of his usual restraint and more curiosity. When she served the soup, he tasted it with thoughtful seriousness before saying, "It is better than anything I have had this week." "Do not lie," she said, narrowing her eyes. He raised a hand. "I swear." Ava smiled, and something warm fluttered in her chest. Later that week, Ava found Julian asleep at the dining table, his head resting on his folded arms, his laptop still glowing faintly beside him. Papers with dense graphs and reports were scattered everywhere, evidence of hours of work he had pushed himself through. She walked over, quietly unsure if waking him was the right thing to do. But he looked cold, the sleeves of his shirt slightly rolled up, revealing tired lines on his skin. Without a word, she retrieved one of the soft blankets from the couch and gently draped it over his shoulders, making sure it covered him fully. Julian stirred slightly, but did not wake. In the soft glow of the pendant lights, Ava watched him breathe, the tension in his face easing as the warmth settled around him. For the first time, she saw him not as a CEO, but as a man who carried too much weight alone. When he opened his eyes minutes later, still groggy and confused, he looked around, then met her gaze. "Did you?" "Yes," she said softly. "You were cold." He blinked slowly, then nodded once. "Thank you." His voice held sincerity that ran deeper than the simple words. Another shift happened on a rainy afternoon when Ava found Julian staring at the small frame holding Emily Grace's damaged photo, the one ruined on the night they first met. He held it delicately, almost with reverence, studying the smudged colors. "I think I can fix this," he said quietly without looking up. Ava froze. "You do not have to." "I want to," he replied. He brought the frame to his workspace and for the next 2 hours worked with patient focus, smoothing the water-warped edges, adjusting the backing, replacing the protective cover, and carefully preserving as much of the original image as possible. When he finally returned it to her, the photo no longer looked broken. Imperfect still, but whole. Ava touched the frame gently, her breath catching. Julian watched her reaction, unsure if he had overstepped. "If it is not right, I can fix it again," he offered. "It is perfect," she whispered. "Thank you." His shoulders relaxed as if her words had eased something in him he had not realized was tight. Moments like these kept threading themselves into their days. One evening, Julian found Ava sitting on the living room floor surrounded by colored pencils sketching simple images for therapy exercises she had seen in the Mercer-Kind labs. He sat beside her, not intruding, simply curious. "What are you drawing?" he asked. She showed him a small page filled with calming shapes. "It helps me clear my mind," she said. He watched her quiet concentration, then picked up one of the pencils. "Teach me." She looked up, startled. "You want to color?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because my head will not stop spinning, and you said this helps." She uncapped a pencil and handed it to him, guiding his hand to fill in a small space. His strokes were clumsy, but he listened carefully, absorbing each instruction. When he finished a tiny section, he looked strangely proud. Ava laughed softly. "You did good." He gave her a faint smile. "Only because you taught me." She felt her heart warm again. Another night, while she was cleaning up the living room, Julian walked in holding a mug of tea. "You have been running around all day," he said, offering it to her. "You should rest." Ava accepted the mug, hesitating. "This is the first time you have made me tea." The corners of his mouth lifted slightly. First time for everything. Even Cora began to notice the subtle changes. She watched Julian glance at Ava during briefings, listened to him soften his tone when speaking to her, and saw the way Ava no longer flinched in his presence. There was no dramatic confession, nothing loud or showy, but the quietness between them had grown full a place where fear did not dominate, and expectations did not suffocate. One night, Ava stood near the window staring at the city lights when Julian stepped beside her close enough that their shoulders brushed lightly. The unspoken closeness did not frighten her. Instead, it felt like a gentle warmth settling where loneliness used to live. "The city looks different from here," she said. "Like it does not want to hurt anyone." Julian glanced at her profile, softened by the glow of the skyline. "It is not the city that decides that," he said quietly. "It is the people you stand with." For a moment, she did not speak, letting his words settle into the quiet between them. And as she finally looked up at him, her heart shifted in a way she could not ignore. Quietly, simply, undeniably, something inside her recognized the truth. These quiet moments felt like love, even if neither of them had dared to name it yet. Ava woke to the faint vibration of her phone on the nightstand, the screen lighting up repeatedly as if the world were trying to pull her from the quiet safety she had slowly begun to build with Julian. She blinked at the unfamiliar flood of notifications, thinking at first it must have been a glitch. But when she reached for the phone and saw the dozens of messages from coworkers, old friends, and unknown numbers, her heart dropped before she even understood why. A link appeared over and over again in the texts. Concerned faces, shocked emojis, questions she did not understand. Her thumb trembled as she tapped one of the links. A video began to play. The image was grainy, framed from a hallway camera angled slightly toward the penthouse entrance. The lighting flickered and the audio was faint, but Ava could clearly see herself. She was running down the hallway, clutching her canvas tote, her face streaked with tears. A distorted voice that sounded almost like hers said, "I cannot do this anymore. I never should have signed that contract." The video cut abruptly, ending with a freeze frame of her face twisted in pain. Ava's chest tightened painfully as she whispered a breathless no. She replayed it, trying to understand how such footage existed when the moment had never happened. She had never stormed out of the penthouse. She had never said those words. But the footage looked real, too real. Before she could process anything, she heard footsteps behind her. Julian appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm the moment he saw her pale, shaking hands gripping her phone. "Ava, what is wrong?" She held out the screen wordlessly, and he stepped forward, taking the device gently but urgently. As he watched the video, his jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing with controlled rage. "This is fake," he said immediately, his voice low but thunderously certain. Someone edited this. Ava pressed a trembling hand to her forehead. People think it is real. They think I ran away because of the contract. Julian shook his head, stepping closer. None of this is your fault. But the panic rising in her chest made it hard to believe him. The notifications kept buzzing, dozens turning into hundreds. Ava's social media accounts flooded with comments, some sympathetic but many laced with cruelty. You knew what you were doing, someone wrote. Playing the victim, another added. Poor girl, trapped by Mercer money, was a lie. Ava began to pace, unable to stay still. Why would someone do this? Why would they want to hurt me? Julian moved in front of her, placing a steadying hand near her elbow. Do not let them define what is true. But the phone buzzed again and again until she could hardly breathe. Screenshots, captions, headlines appearing in real time. A popular media outlet had already posted an article. Poor girl flees Mercer penthouse in tears. Exclusive footage leaking alleged contract breakdown. Speculation spiraling around secret marriage arrangements. Ava felt the floor tilt beneath her. She sat abruptly on the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. This is too much, she whispered. I cannot handle this. Not again. The memory of losing Emily Grace tore through her like a reopened wound. The moment she had been told she had no legal right to stay in the child's life. The moment she had been powerless to protect someone she loved. She could feel that same helplessness clawing at her again now, amplified by millions of strangers watching a moment she never lived. Julian crouched in front of her, trying to meet her eyes. Ava, look at me. She did not. Her breathing grew shallow and uneven. Julian gently touched her wrists, lowering her hands from her face. Ava, please breathe with me. She tried, but the words online kept ringing in her ears. Gold digger, liar, fake victim. Julian's expression tightened with fury she had never seen from him. Whoever made this will be held accountable, he said firmly. I promise you that. But Ava shook her head. They already believe it, she whispered. Once something is online, people do not care about truth. They care about drama. He sat beside her on the bed, his presence solid and steady. Then we show them truth. Ava hugged her tote instinctively, holding it close like a lifeline. Her mind raced with fear. What if the board sees it? What if this ruins everything you have worked for? Julian's voice softened. I do not care about the board more than I care about you. Ava looked up at him, startled by the intensity of his words. He exhaled slowly, frustration bleeding into weariness. I am going to find out who did this. I will have my security team trace the source. But Ava's heart was now spiraling faster than logic. She stood from the bed, pacing again, her fingers digging into her palms. The comments, the lies, the speculation, everything swarmed her thoughts until the room felt too bright, too loud. Julian moved toward her, but she stepped back instinctively, overwhelmed by everything crashing down at once. I need space, she whispered, her voice cracking. Just for a moment. Julian stopped, immediately respecting her boundary even though worry clouded his eyes. Ava walked toward the living room, collapsing onto the couch, her breath trembling as she pressed her forehead into her knees, desperate to ground herself. Through the haze, she heard Julian on the phone speaking with sharp-clipped words to his security team. Pull the building footage. Check all unauthorized access. I want sources analyzed by morning. Ava closed her eyes, trying not to drown in the rising tide of panic. Minutes passed, maybe longer, before Julian returned, sitting on the opposite end of the couch, giving her the space she needed, but staying close enough that she did not feel alone. His voice came soft, this time gentle. We will get through this. Ava nodded weakly, but her throat tightened again. A single question echoed in her mind. If this is what the world thinks of me now, what will they do when they learn more? The night stretched heavy around them, the glow from the city casting faint shadows across the room as Ava clutched the restored photo frame Julian had repaired days earlier. She held on to it like it was the only proof that she had ever been cared for by anyone. Outside, the storm of rumors grew louder. Inside the penthouse, a quieter storm raged inside her chest. And somewhere far from where they sat, Cora Shaw stared at her own phone, the corners of her lips curling slightly as she watched the chaos unfold. Her plan had only just begun. Julian barely slept after the viral leak, but Ava slept even less. She paced the apartment long after midnight, her thoughts tangled in fear and disbelief, while Julian fought through hours of emergency calls with his legal and security teams trying to contain a crisis that should never have existed. By morning, the situation had worsened. Headlines multiplied, blogs speculated, influencers dissected a moment that had never been real. Julian stepped into his office exhausted and tense, while Ava tried to keep herself composed in the guest room, staring blankly at her phone every time another hateful comment appeared. But what neither of them knew was that Cora Shaw had arrived at the office early, her expression calm, her steps deliberate. She held a portfolio under her arm and her tablet in hand, waiting outside Julian's office until his meeting ended. The moment the door opened, she entered with just enough urgency to appear concerned, but not frantic. Julian looked up from his computer, rubbing his temple. "Cora, what is it?" She hesitated for the perfect amount of time before setting the tablet on his desk. "This came to my attention about an hour ago. I'm sorry you have to see it, but I think you need to." Julian frowned, tapping the screen. A message thread appeared labeled Ava Clark. His pulse slowed before he even opened it, something deep inside warning him that whatever he was about to see, he would not want to believe. The conversation loaded slowly, showing Ava's name beside what appeared to be her profile picture. At first glance, the text looked painfully authentic. Ava's supposed messages read, "I know the contract will cause drama. If the paparazzi pays enough, I can leak the truth." Another line said, "I will make sure I get something out of this." A final message read, "I need money. Can you confirm the payout for exclusive content?" Julian's stomach dropped. It felt as if someone had pulled the floor out from under him. He stared at the screen, unable to breathe. The texts looked real, too real, and each sentence twisted into something far removed from the woman who had cried over a ruined drawing and stood trembling under cameras the night before. Cora watched his reaction carefully, her expression one of practiced sympathy. "I hoped it was fabricated," she said. "But the timing matches the leak." Julian shut his eyes once squeezing them tightly. "Ava would never," he whispered, but the words sounded uncertain even to his own ears. Doubt slithered into his chest, poisoning the quiet trust that had begun to form between them. Cora placed a careful hand on the edge of the desk. "I know you want to believe in her, but this looks like she negotiated with the paparazzi before the leak even happened." Julian stared at the screen again, his jaw tightening. The formatting, the timestamps, the phrasing, everything looked consistent with Ava's usual messaging style. His heart tried to reject it, but his mind whispered, what if? What if she had lied? What if those quiet moments had been nothing more than strategy? What if he had been foolish enough to open a door she never deserved? Cora stepped back, sensing she had planted enough doubt. "I thought you should see it before the board does." Julian nodded slowly, his throat dry. "Thank you." He managed, though the words barely left his mouth. When Cora left his office, a faint smile crossed her lips before she wiped it away. The seed had been planted. Meanwhile, Ava stood in the kitchen desperately trying to steady her hands as she poured water into a glass. She felt emotionally hollow, like the chaos outside had taken every bit of strength she had left. When Julian finally returned to the penthouse, his steps were quiet but heavy. Ava looked up immediately, her face brightening for a brief second as if hoping he had come with reassurance, only for the hope to falter when she saw the tension in his gaze. "Julian," she whispered, "is everything all right?" He did not answer at first. He set his keys down and walked past her toward the living room, stopping only when she followed him. Ava approached slowly, noticing the unreadable expression on his face. "What happened?" she asked gently. Julian turned, holding his phone in his hand. He hesitated before showing it to her. "Do you want to explain this?" Ava frowned, confused, before her eyes dropped to the screen. The message thread stared back at her, each sentence like a blow to her chest. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head. "Julian, this is not real. These are not my messages." His voice was quieter than she expected, but colder too. "They look real." Ava stepped back, the shock hitting her like icy water. "You think I wrote these? You think I sold you out?" Julian opened his mouth and closed it, unable to commit to either answer. The hesitation was enough. Something inside Ava cracked. "After everything," she whispered, "after I trusted you with the truth, you think I would betray you like this?" Julian ran a hand through his hair, clearly tormented. "I do not know what to think," he said, and the uncertainty in his voice cut deeper than any accusation. Ava felt her breath tighten. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady the rising panic. Julian stepped toward her instinctively as if to catch her, but she held up a trembling hand to stop him. "Do not," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Do not come near me if you think I did this." Julian froze at her words. Ava tried to swallow the ache flooding her throat. "I stood beside you through all of this. I believed in you even when they called me names and judged me. And you think I would take money to hurt you." Julian looked pained but still conflicted. "I found this through an internal source. I cannot ignore it." Ava's heart shattered. She closed her eyes, fighting back tears. "Then you never trusted me at all." She turned away, walking toward her room, moving as if the ground might disappear beneath her feet. Julian followed a step. "Ava, wait." But she shook her head, her voice raw. "No. If you believed even for a second that I could do this, then nothing I say will matter now." She gathered her things quickly, her hands trembling as she stuffed clothes back into her suitcase, her breath shaking uncontrollably. Julian stood at the doorway, torn his chest tight with regret but still chained to the doubt the forged messages had forced upon him. Ava grabbed the handle of her suitcase and walked past him, eyes red but determined. Julian reached out gently, touching her arm. "Ava, please." For a moment she stopped, but only long enough to whisper in a broken voice, "You think I am like everyone else who ever tried to use you. That hurts more than anything they said about me." Julian's fingers slipped away. Ava walked to the elevator, her grip tight on the suitcase handle. When the doors opened, she stepped inside. Julian stayed frozen, watching helplessly as the doors slid shut, separating them. For the first time since she entered his life, the penthouse felt colder than ever, and Ava, for the first time since meeting him, truly felt alone again. Julian did not remember how long he stood in the silent penthouse after Ava left, only that the emptiness pressed in on him like a weight he could not shake. The night stretched into morning with no sleep to soften the edges of the regret gnawing at him. When dawn finally broke dull and gray across Manhattan, he forced himself to dress for the emergency board meeting scheduled for 8 o'clock. His reflection in the mirror showed dark circles under his eyes and tension in every line of his jaw, but none of it compared to the hollow ache sitting in the center of his chest. As the car drove him to Mercer Labs, he replayed every second of the night, before every word that had cracked between them, every look in Ava's eyes as she realized he did not believe her. He swallowed hard, trying to focus on the battle ahead, but the thought of her hurt lingered like a wound that refused to close. When he walked through the towering glass lobby, employees stepped aside, whispering quietly. The viral leak had turned into a media storm overnight, and the board's concern had escalated into panic. The elevator ride was suffocatingly silent. When the doors opened onto the executive floor, Marcus Hale was already waiting outside the boardroom, impeccably dressed with an expression of well-rehearsed disappointment. "Julian," he said with a polite tilt of his head as if they were merely discussing quarterly numbers instead of a crisis engineered to push him out. "We have a lot to discuss." Julian ignored the false pleasantry and brushed past him, entering the boardroom where 12 members were already seated, murmuring among themselves. Screens along the walls displayed headlines of the scandal, the leaked video, speculation about the contract, images of Ava crying as she ran down a hallway she had never actually run through. Julian took his seat at the head of the table, but several board members exchanged looks of concern. Marcus closed the doors and stepped forward holding a folder. "First order of business," he said, "is the matter of your compromise judgment." Julian lifted his gaze slowly. Compromise judgment. Marcus set the folder on the table and opened it with a flourish. "The scandal has damaged investor confidence, and this staged marriage is at the center of it. The contract you signed has now backfired. Ava Clark has evidently been communicating with the press and potentially manipulating you. Julian's jaw tightened. That is not true. Marcus raised a brow. We have evidence. Julian felt something twist painfully in his chest. Evidence. The same forged messages that had driven Ava away. Marcus passed printed copies of the fake texts around the table. Board members leaned forward reading the supposed messages with growing disapproval. This looks damning, one member said, frowning. Julian, you should have vetted her more carefully. Another sighed. The video leak clearly shows her leaving distressed. She obviously recorded it herself for profit. Julian's hands curled into fists. None of that is real. She did not leak anything. She did not betray me. Marcus studied him with feigned sympathy. Julian, denial only worsens the situation. The evidence is right there. Julian shot him a cold stare. Where did you get this evidence? Marcus gave a slight shrug. An internal source. Someone concerned about the company. Julian's pulse quickened. The wording, the timestamps, the structure. He suddenly remembered something that had nagged at him the night before when studying the contract, the odd phrasing in the clause requiring heirs of phrasing Marcus had slipped into the draft behind his back. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Marcus, who provided these messages. Marcus maintained his calm mask. It does not matter who provided them. What matters is that they appear authentic to the board. Julian rose slowly from his chair, the shift in his posture drawing attention from every person at the table. Actually, he said evenly, it matters very much, because the only person who had access to both the contract drafts and my private calendar was you. Marcus stiffened. Be careful with your accusations. Julian ignored him and turned toward the door. Bring in Cora Shaw. The board members glanced at one another surprised as the door opened and Cora entered, her expression carefully neutral, though Julian immediately noticed the tension in her hands. Julian crossed his arms. Cora, please tell the board how you came across the messages you forwarded to me. Cora hesitated only briefly before slipping into the practiced composure she wore so well. I found them through an external contact who claimed they had proof Ava was in talks with the paparazzi. I forwarded them because I believed Mr. Mercer needed to know. Julian studied her closely. And did you verify them? Cora lifted her chin. I trusted the source. Julian stepped closer, his voice steady but edged with steel. Did you trust the source, or did Marcus instruct you to trust the source? The room fell utterly silent. Cora's composure faltered. Marcus shot forward in his seat. Enough of this, Julian. Those are serious accusations. Julian turned to him slowly. Yes, they are. And I am ready to back them. He pressed a button on the table and the screens lit up with security logs. These logs, he said, show that the messages came from a device associated with your office, Marcus. Not from Ava's, not from somewhere outside. From you. Gasps rippled through the boardroom. Cora's face drained of color. Marcus started to protest, but Julian cut him off. And these logs also show that the contract was amended without my approval 2 hours before signing. The same amendment that used terminology exactly matching the fake messages. Silence choked the room. Cora finally broke, collapsing slightly as she whispered, I did what he told me to do. Marcus's head whipped toward her, eyes blazing, but she continued, her voice trembling. He said it was necessary to protect the company, that we needed Julian to lose control so the board could intervene. Julian stared at Marcus' fury burning beneath his calm veneer. You undermined me. You manipulated the contract. You engineered a scandal. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. You were losing control of Mercer Labs. I did what was needed. Julian turned to the board. I call for an immediate vote to remove Marcus Hale from the board for gross misconduct and manipulation of company assets. The room erupted in murmurs, but one by one, hands rose. All in favor. 10 hands lifted. Only Marcus kept his down. It is decided, Julian said quietly. Marcus Hale is removed effective immediately. Security. 2 guards entered escorting Marcus out while he shouted protests no one bothered to acknowledge. Julian stood there breathing hard, the adrenaline still coursing through him. He had won the boardroom war, but the victory felt hollow, because Ava was gone, and clearing his name had not cleared the hurt he caused her. When the room emptied, Julian remained standing alone, staring at the empty chairs, knowing exactly what he had to do next. He needed to find her, and he needed to make things right, no matter how far he had to go. Ava had not planned to return to Austin so soon, but the moment the elevator doors closed on Julian, she booked the first flight she could afford, packed her belongings with shaking hands, and left New York before she could lose the fragile courage keeping her upright. She landed in Texas with nothing but a small suitcase and a hollow ache in her chest, settling into the guest room of her old coworker Maya, who opened the door without questions and pulled her into a warm hug. Ava tried to smile, but the expression fell apart instantly, and Maya simply guided her inside, whispering, "You are safe now." Austin felt different this time, quieter, heavier, as if the city itself sensed that Ava had left behind something she could not replace. She tried returning to the cafe where she had once worked, a familiar place with wooden tables and the comforting smell of roasted beans. The manager welcomed her back with open arms, and Ava spent the next few days wiping counters, making lattes, and taking orders, pretending life had rewound to a time before penthouses and contracts and scandals. But every quiet moment brought Julian's voice back to her memory. Every glance at her phone tempted her to check messages that were never there. She had left New York believing there was nothing left for her in that world, but the truth clung to her heart no matter how hard she tried to ignore it. She missed him. Not the CEO, not the contract, not the penthouse. Him. She missed the quiet moments coloring beside him, the soft warmth of his voice when he thanked her for small kindnesses, the way he looked at her as if she mattered even when she felt invisible everywhere else. But he had believed the worst of her, and that was something she could not undo. She was wiping down a table one rainy afternoon when she heard the bell above the cafe door chime. She did not look up immediately, expecting another regular customer. But then a familiar presence filled the quiet space, a presence she felt before she even saw him. When she finally turned, her breath caught. Julian stood soaked from the rain, his dark hair clinging to his forehead, his coat dripping onto the floor. His usually composed expression had been replaced by something raw and unguarded. He scanned the room until his eyes found hers, and in that instant Ava felt her heart lurch painfully. "Julian," she whispered, unable to believe he was truly standing there. He took a step forward, his gaze fixed entirely on her. "I have been looking for you everywhere," he said, his voice rough as though he had not slept in days. Ava swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay still. "You should not be here." Julian shook his head slowly, rainwater dripping from his coat. "I should have come sooner." Ava tightened her grip on the cloth in her hand, feeling her chest tighten. "Why are you here?" Julian stepped closer, stopping only when he was a few feet away, giving her space but refusing to retreat. "Because I need to tell you the truth. All of it." Before she could respond, he continued, his voice steady but filled with regret. "The messages you saw were fake. They were fabricated by Marcus and Cora to push me out of the company. They framed you to hurt me." Ava blinked, stunned. Her lips parted but no words came out. Julian took a slow breath as if gathering what little strength he had left. "And I believed them for a moment. That moment cost me you." Ava looked away, the memory of that night still raw. "You doubted me," she whispered. "You looked at those messages and doubted me." He closed his eyes briefly as if the truth stung him as deeply as it had hurt her. "I did, and I will regret that for the rest of my life." Ava set the cloth aside, her heart pounding. Julian stepped closer, hands trembling slightly at his sides. "I have spent years being betrayed by people who pretended to care. I have spent so long expecting the worst that when I finally met someone honest, someone kind, someone who asked for nothing from me, I did not know how to hold that trust." She felt her breath catch, but she still asked the question burning inside her. "And do you trust me now?" Julian looked directly into her eyes, the pain and sincerity in his gaze unmistakable. "More than anyone I have ever known." Ava inhaled shakily, struggling to steady her voice. "You hurt me, Julian." His face tightened. "I know, and I am not asking you to forget it. or pretend it did not happen, but I need you to know that the moment you walked out, everything fell apart. Not because of the board, not because of the scandal, but because I pushed away the only person who ever stood beside me without wanting anything in return." He hesitated, then added more softly than she had ever heard him speak, "You deserved faith, and I did not give it to you." She felt tears prick her eyes, and she blinked them back, forcing her voice to remain steady. "Why come here? Why now?" Julian's shoulders lowered as if the truth was pulling everything out of him. "Because none of it matters without you. Not the company, not the board, not the contract. I tore up the fake evidence. I confronted Marcus. He is gone. Cora confessed everything. But none of that fixes what I did to you." Ava stared at him, her chest tightening with emotion she could no longer suppress. Julian continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I am not here to ask you to come back. I am here because you deserved the truth from me, the same truth you gave about Emily Grace." The mention of Emily softly cracked the last wall around Ava's heart. Her voice trembled. "I did not want to lose her." Julian stepped closer until her reflection shimmered in his eyes. "I do not want to lose you either." A quiet confession hung between them, gentle and honest. For the first time since she left New York, Ava saw more than remorse in Julian's face. She saw the man who had repaired Emily's photo frame with his own hands, the man who had learned to color beside her, the man who had whispered, "You do not owe me pain, just to make this work." He was imperfect, flawed, hurting, but he was real. She took a slow breath, feeling her voice steady. "Julian." He lifted his head, waiting for whatever came next. "I wanted to believe in you," she whispered, "and a part of me still does." His eyes softened, the faintest trembling relief crossing his expression. "Then let me rebuild what I broke," he said quietly, "not with promises, with actions." Ava looked at him for a long moment, the rain pattering softly against the windows, the cafe around them fading into silence. She exhaled, finally releasing a breath she had been holding for days. "Thank you for telling me the truth." Julian's expression wavered, hope flickering gently. "That is all I wanted," he said softly, "to give you the truth you deserved." Ava nodded, unsure of what she was ready for yet, but certain of one thing. This conversation was not the ending. It was the beginning of the moment she needed most. To breathe, to heal, to decide what came next, a choice she finally felt strong enough to make. Ava had expected Julian to leave after telling her the truth, but instead he remained standing inside the quiet cafe as if he could not bring himself to walk away until she did. The rain outside softened into a steady patter against the windows, and for a moment neither of them spoke, letting the fragile silence settle around them like something delicate that might break if touched too quickly. When Maya signaled she would handle the counter, Ava nodded gratefully, then gestured toward a small table near the window. Julian followed her, quietly sitting across from her with a hesitance she had never seen in him before. He did not look like a CEO now, nor like the polished figure the world dissected daily. He looked human, worn, honest, waiting. Ava folded her hands on the table, trying to steady the flutter in her chest. "I do not know what happens next," she admitted softly. Her voice trembled not from fear, but from the weight of possibility. Julian nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "You do not have to know. Whatever comes next is your choice. Not mine, not the board's. No pressure, no obligation." Ava looked down at her hands, remembering the contract that had once defined every step of their connection. The idea of obligations and expectations had shaped her world for so long that hearing him release her from them felt like stepping into fresh air after years of breathing through smoke. Julian reached into his coat pocket and placed a sealed envelope on the table. It was thin, but felt strangely heavy. "What is that?" she asked. He pushed it gently toward her. "The contract. I terminated it. Legally. Officially. The marriage clause. The partnership clause. All of it." Her breath caught. "You ended it. Completely." Julian nodded slowly. "I never want you to feel trapped by something written on paper. If you choose to be in my life, I want it to be because you want to, not because your name is attached to mine in a legal document. Ava swallowed hard emotion rising like tidewater inside her. Why did you bring it here? Julian exhaled shakily, running a hand through his rain-damp hair. Because I needed you to see that I meant it. That whatever we are, whatever we could become, will be real. Paper should not hold us together. Choice should. The sincerity in his voice wrapped around her heart in a way she had not been prepared for. She looked at the envelope again, its edges soft from being carried through the rain. Slowly, she picked it up, running her thumb along the seal before setting it aside. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded, but she could see the uncertainty beneath the calm surface. He did not know whether she would return with him or send him away. He respected either possibility, but the longing in his eyes was impossible to miss. Ava took a slow breath. "I need time," she said honestly. "Time to think, time to breathe, time to believe this is real." Julian nodded. "Then take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere." She studied him carefully. "And what about the company? The board? Are you all right?" A faint, tired smile crossed his lips. "Marcus is gone," Cora confessed. "The board restored my authority temporarily, but that is not what matters right now." Ava frowned slightly. "But it does matter. Mercer Labs is a part of your life. I do not want you to lose everything because of this." Julian leaned forward, his voice firm but gentle. "I would rather lose everything than lose myself, and doubting you almost made me do that." She stared at him, the sincerity in his words settling deep inside her. Before she could respond, the cafe door chimed again and a small family entered, bringing a rush of cool air. The moment broke gently. Julian leaned back, giving her space. Ava stood. "I need fresh air," she said quietly. Julian rose immediately, keeping a respectful distance as they stepped outside under the awning. The rain had softened to a drizzle, leaving the street slick and shimmering beneath the streetlights. Ava breathed in the damp air, letting it clear the last of the tension coiled in her chest. She turned to him. "You asked me once if I needed a safe place, and you meant it, even when everything went wrong." Julian nodded slowly. "And I still mean it. Always." Ava hesitated, then extended her hand palm open as if offering something fragile. "Come walk with me." Julian looked almost startled by the gesture, but he took her hand gently, the contact light almost tentative. They walked down the quiet Austin street in silence, their steps in rhythm with the distant hum of traffic. They passed familiar shops and quiet windows, and Ava felt something in her heart soften with every step. When they reached the small park where she used to take Emily Grace, she paused beneath an old oak tree. The branches swayed gently above them, the leaves glistening with lingering raindrops. "This place matters to you," Julian said softly. Ava nodded, brushing a hand along the damp wooden bench. "I used to bring Emily here every weekend. It was her favorite place." Julian watched her with a tenderness she had not expected. "I want to help you find her again," he said gently. Her breath caught. Her family moved. "I do not even know where." Julian's voice deepened with quiet certainty. "I will help you find them. Legally. Respectfully. Not to take anything from them, only to give you a chance to say what you never got to say." A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Julian reached out slowly, giving her enough time to step away if she wished. She did not. He gently brushed the tear from her skin, his touch careful and warm. Ava inhaled shakily. "Julian." "Yes." She looked into his eyes and felt the truth settle inside her like a calm she had not felt in months. "I want to come back to New York." His breath caught, but not because of the contract, because of you. The relief that washed across his face was almost heartbreaking. Ava continued, her voice soft but steady. "But we rebuild this slowly, on equal ground. No titles, no expectations, no pressure. Just us." Julian nodded, his eyes warm and steady. "Just us." The words felt like a promise that needed no signature, no witness, no clause. A promise made by choice alone. Ava stepped closer, letting the quiet of the park wrap around them. Julian looked at her as if she were something he had been searching for long before he even realized he needed it. And standing under the soft rain, lit by the gentle glow of the street lamps, she finally allowed herself to believe it. She was choosing him, and he was choosing her. No contracts, no conditions. Just love taking its first real breath. 6 months later, New York felt different, not because the city had changed, but because Ava walked through it with a steadiness she once believed she would never find. The air carried the crisp calm of early spring sunlight reflecting off the rooftops and warming the glass walls of the Mercer Labs Community Center that now opened its doors freely to families across the city. Inside, children filled the rooms with laughter and color, therapists guided gentle activities, and the Mercer Kind program flourished beyond what anyone had predicted. Ava stood in one of the art therapy rooms adjusting a shelf of watercolor trays while a small group of children waited for her to begin their morning session. She wore a simple cardigan splattered with tiny paint marks, her hair tied back, and a soft smile on her face. When she lifted a paintbrush to demonstrate a simple shading technique, the children leaned closer, listening with rapt attention. Her voice was calm, steady, patient. The voice of someone who had finally found a place where she mattered. After class, one little boy ran up and wrapped his arms around her waist, thanking her for helping him finish his drawing. Ava knelt down, smiling warmly, and told him she was proud of him. The boy's mother approached, wiping her eyes with gratitude, repeating "thank you" again and again. Ava watched them, leave her heart warm from a joy that felt grounded and real. As she packed away the art supplies, a familiar presence appeared in the doorway. Julian leaned against the frame, dressed in a simple button-down sleeves, rolled up, his expression softening the moment he saw her. "Finished changing lives for the morning," he teased lightly. She laughed, shaking her head. "Hardly. They changed mine first." Julian stepped forward and placed a folder on the table. "More applications," he said. "The program is expanding faster than we expected." Ava opened the folder, scanning the pages. Children from all over the city were enrolling families, writing letters expressing hope because they finally had a center that welcomed them without barriers. She closed the folder and looked at Julian, gratitude shining in her eyes. "I still cannot believe you built this." He shook his head. "We built this. You shaped the heart of it." Before she could respond, one of the therapists called Julian's name, asking him to sign off on new equipment. He handled the request quickly, then returned to her side, his hand brushing gently against hers, a quiet, familiar gesture. "Ready for lunch?" he asked. "Always." They walked through the center together, greeting staff members and families along the way. Outside, cherry blossoms swayed gently in the breeze, petals drifting along the sidewalk like confetti. The city hummed around them, but it no longer felt overwhelming. It felt like home, stitched together with the small moments they had chosen day by day. After lunch, Julian guided her toward the elevator that led to the rooftop garden above the center. Ava raised a brow. "You are acting suspiciously calm." He smiled, his quiet, almost shy smile. "Maybe I just want to show you something." The rooftop was empty when they stepped out, and the sky stretching wide above them painted in soft hues of pale blue. Planters filled with herbs and wildflowers lined the edges, and the city skyline framed everything perfectly. Ava stepped forward, inhaling the fresh scent of mint and lavender carried by the wind. "I love this place," she murmured. "I know," Julian said, softly behind her. She turned and then froze. Julian stood with something carefully wrapped in brown paper resting in his hands. His expression was warm, steady, and a touch nervous. He held it out to her. "I have been working on this for a while." Ava took the package slowly, unwrapping it with delicate fingers. When the paper fell away, she gasped softly. It was the drawing from Emily Grace, the one that had been drenched in rain the night they met. But now it looked completely restored, the colors brightened, the edges carefully repaired. Julian had framed it again, but this time with a new border one Ava recognized instantly. Around the picture were tiny digital illustrations of the Mercer Kind characters she had created, woven together like a gentle celebration of her past and her present united in one image. Her breath caught. "Julian, how did you—" He stepped closer, his voice calm. "I wanted you to have something that reminded you that your past is not something you lost. It is something you carry into everything beautiful you do now." Ava touched the frame, smoothing her thumb over Emily's little scribbled heart, feeling tears gather in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the warmth filling her chest. She looked at Julian, who watched her with a softness reserved only for her. "Thank you," she whispered. "You always know how to fix the things I did not think could be fixed." Julian shook his head gently. "Not fix. Honor." She took a breath, steadier than before. "You helped me find her family. You did not have to do that." He nodded. "It mattered to you. That made it matter to me." They stood quietly, the breeze brushing through Ava's hair, the city humming softly below them. After a moment, Julian reached into his pocket again, but only pulled out a small silver charm shaped like a paintbrush attached to a braided string. No rings, nothing overwhelming, just something simple, something that said, "I see you." He held it out to her. "For your tote," he said gently. "Reminder of the day everything changed and the days we chose what came after." Ava took it smiling through tears. She tied it to the handle of her canvas bag, letting it dangle beside the restored frame inside. Julian stepped closer, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Their silence was full. Not empty, the silence of two people who no longer feared the future because they were not facing it alone. He brushed a loose strand of hair from her cheek, the gesture tender. "Whatever tomorrow looks like," he said softly, "we will choose it together." Ava smiled, warm and certain. Yes, together. She leaned into him, her head resting gently against his shoulder as the breeze carried the scent of blossoms around them. In the distance, the city moved on, endless and unpredictable, but for the first time Ava felt no fear of what came next. The future would not break her, because she was walking into it with someone who saw her not as a contract, not as a headline, not as someone to rescue or someone to use, but simply as the person he wanted to share his life with. And as Ava wrapped her fingers around Julian's hand, she realized something profound. She was no longer surviving. She was finally living. If you reached this moment, then thank you for staying with me through every storm, every quiet heartbeat, every choice Ava and Julian made to build a life not from a contract but from courage. Stories like this one remind us that sometimes the most unexpected people walk into our lives right when everything is falling apart, and somehow they become the reason we learn to breathe again. And now I want to hear from you, because this channel is not just a place where I tell stories. It is where we build a community that feels every twist, every heartbreak, and every healing moment together. So, here is my question for you. If you were Ava, standing in the rain that night carrying the last pieces of the past you loved, what would you have done? Would you have accepted help from a stranger? Would you have trusted someone as powerful as Julian? Or would you have walked away to protect your heart? Tell me honestly in the comments, because your voice helps shape the next stories I bring to this channel. And if you were Julian standing at the window watching someone break quietly in front of you, would you have stopped the car? Would you offer a safe place? Or would you be too afraid of being misunderstood? I would love to know. Every comment you leave becomes part of something bigger, not just numbers on a screen, but real people sharing real feelings from every corner of the world. And because so many of you always tell me where you are watching from, let us do it again. Drop your country, your city, or your state in the comments. I love seeing our community grow from New York to California, from London to Trinidad, from Texas to the Philippines, and everywhere in between. If you have ever felt alone or unheard or judged for not having everything figured out, I hope Ava's journey reminded you of something important. You deserve patience. You deserve kindness. You deserve connections that grow from understanding, not from conditions. And if her story touched you even the smallest bit, please remember to like this video so YouTube knows you want more stories like this. And if you love emotional slow burn love stories, surprising billionaire twists, healing arcs, and powerful female leads who rise again and again, then subscribe and turn on notifications, because I have so many stories coming your way. Stories that will break your heart a little, then stitch it back together carefully. Stories that make you believe in second chances. Stories that make you feel seen. And if you want to support this channel even more, share this video with someone who loves romance stories too. Someone who deserves to feel hope again. Someone who might need a reminder that their future is still wide open. Before you go, I want you to answer one last question, and this is my favorite part. If you could say one sentence to Ava or Julian right now, what would it be? something encouraging, something honest, something you wish someone had told you when you needed it. Leave your message for them below. I read every single comment and I always feel your hearts in them. Thank you for being here, thank you for choosing this channel, and thank you for believing that love stories still matter. I will see you in the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, take a deep breath, and remember sometimes the future stops being scary the moment you choose to face it with the right person by your side.